today we are here to listen on the subject, the Ebola virus, a perspective from the front line. We are happy to have a distinguished son of the soil and honorary graduate, Dr. Earl, with us. We thank him especially for taking time off his vacation to present to us and to remind us that there is something called Ebola, because I had forgotten myself. It was just last year, July it was, we were all making a big fuss about Ebola, and all of a sudden things have died out. And at least it's good that Dr. Long is here and is here to remind us that Ebola still exists. As usual, this is just one of our monthly lectures, and we want to continue that kind of discourse, that kind of information, keeping people things at the top of persons' minds. So we want to try to continue that as much as possible. So again, as usual, and our usual people will know, we encourage you, members of the public, to present to us topics that you would like to be discussed. And again, if we have any persons within the audience who would like to present, this is also welcome. So on behalf of Dr. Simon and the staff of UWI Open Campus, I welcome you, and I'm looking forward to a very interesting lecture.
I've had 3 trips to Guinea. The first trip was in January of last year, 2014. I was asked by a number of organizations to go have a look at diagnostic facilities. At that time, the principal public health concern in Guinea was malaria. It was responsible for more morbidity and mortality than any other disease then. So I was able to do visit health facilities in about half of the country, a representative half of the country. And after my report was sent to Washington, I was asked almost immediately to return to help with the training, because the situation was the situation was graver than anyone had anticipated. It was really very, very bad. And it was while I was there that Ebola got to the capital. And the situation got very, very tense, because it was a new disease, it was catastrophic, it had disrupted families, the medical services, all of the services in Guinea, and no one knew quite how to handle it. So I was called by CDC and asked whether I could return to Guinea for a year. And I said no, I had retired. And I had been to Guinea twice before. I knew what conditions were like. And I didn't think I could manage 1 year in Guinea. So we bargained for a while until we settled on 2 months, because I told him I did not like traveling for more than two weeks at a time. Retirement does have some of its, there are some nice things about retirement, and I was beginning to like them. This was a statement of work. I would serve as laboratory coordinator for the Ebola response, because there were lots of countries that had sent diagnostic assistance to Guinea, and they were not talking to each other. No one knew what systems were being used, what reporting was being used. So first I had to coordinate between the laboratories from different countries and different agencies. So I had to ensure regular meetings by laboratory directors. Once a week we had to meet to discuss what we had been doing and what was going on. We had to distribute controls to testing facilities. The controls were standards that were set by CDC in Atlanta and sent to all of the labs to ensure that we were getting reliable results. Then the most important was to introduce the rapid test to the authorities, because the test we were using was a PCR. It's very sensitive, very specific. The problem was it's very expensive, and it took a long time. The most rapid PCR test took 3 to 4 hours. It's also expensive, so specimens had to be batched. So specimens would be collected in the morning from patients, sent to the diagnostic labs in the afternoon, and the results given the next morning. So it took 24 hours for a diagnosis. And everyone wanted a more rapid test, especially with the dead. The government had decided that all dead, all deceased were to be tested, everybody, because no one knew what anybody was dying of anymore. So the government had decided every dead body had to be tested, and it was much too expensive to do it with a conventional test. So this was one of the requirements of the rapid test, that it should be done within an acceptable time. And the rapid test available took 20 minutes rather than 24 hours. We had to evaluate the rapid test under the local conditions to be sure that it worked there. We knew that it worked in the labs in the States, but that's not where it was needed. It was needed out in the field. We had to seek IRB approval, Institutional Review Board approval. That was the most difficult. To get senior medical people to sit down, to meet over 10 days to decide whether the test could be used in Guinea. Then we had to train the users and then decide on selected sites and provide the tests. The virus, it's a very simple virus, extremely simple. It's simply a little bit of genetic material in an envelope. Now, the human genome is 20,000 genes. That means it takes 20,000 little programs to make you who you are. The Ebola virus has 7. That's all it needs. And it can devastate a body. The anatomy of the virus, I'll show you how simple it is. There it is, this little genetic bit of material in an envelope. That's all it is. How the virus gets into the cell is that it persuades the cell that it is part of it. You see the little projections on the body, on its envelope, are recognized by the outside of the cell. And so the cell is fooled into thinking that the virus is a part of it. The virus is a very difficult thing to describe because it doesn't have all of the characteristics of something that lives. It doesn't breathe, it doesn't move, it doesn't feed, it doesn't reproduce, it doesn't do anything. But it is a perfect parasite because it takes over a host cell and makes the cell do everything for it. It's like sending a command to a printer. All you do, you press print, and then the printer will go on doing what you've told it to do forever and ever until it runs out of paper or ink or breaks down. That's how the virus works. It doesn't reproduce itself. A virus cannot divide. It makes the cell do all of that for it. Now the history, just a bit of the history and epidemiology of the virus. First discovered in '76 in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, in a village called Yambuku. Somebody made an error and thought that the village was Ebola. That's how it got its name. But Ebola was the name of a river which was nearby. But the name stuck. And since then, there have been 40 outbreaks in the Democratic Republic of Congo, in the Sudan, Gabon, Uganda, Guinea, Liberia, Sierra Leone, and it's been imported into Senegal, Nigeria, USA, and Spain. There was also we also had a problem with Mali. It's not mentioned there, but this grandmother took an orphaned granddaughter after her parents had died into Mali and started a small outbreak. But fortunately, it was contained before it went too far. Now, in December 4th, in 2013, exactly 1 month before I went to Guinea for the first time, in the village of Meliandou in southern Guinea, close to the border of Sierra Leone and Liberia. That's important, close to the borders of Sierra Leone and Liberia, because these are the 3 countries which are most seriously affected. Because the people living in this area do not recognize borders, so it's just the same group of people who live there. A 2-year-old, Emile Uwamuno, developed a fever, started vomiting, and had black stools. 4 days later, he was dead. And within a month, so were his mother, grandmother, and his 4-year-old sister. That's how it started. Now, this is the best description I have read of Ebola. It's written by Benjamin Hill in the Medical Examiner. Ebola propagates itself by preying on care and love, piggybacking on the deepest, most distinctly human virtues. Affected parties are almost all medical professionals and family members caring for their fellow humans. 75% of victims are women, Ebola parasitizes our humanity. So it's more than a disease. It is, as I mentioned before, a catastrophe. It goes for the most human of emotions, and that is love. Because Ebola goes from person to person because of love, because of caring, so it jumps from one to the next. These are the symptoms, and they can start in as soon as 2 days after infection. And the early stage is fever, joint or muscle pain, weakness, sore throat, headache, chills, abdominal pain, diarrhea, vomiting, rash, decreased liver, and kidney functions. Now you present these to a clinician and it's hell because they're non-specific. There are so many things that it could be typhoid, it could be malaria, it could be the flu, it could be almost anything. It's really difficult to diagnose clinically. Then there is a later stage. Then there is liver and kidney failure, difficulty breathing, internal and external bleeding, reddening of eyes, vomiting blood, shock, and death. Because what Ebola does is destroy system after system, so the body just goes into shock and collapses. Transmission. Blood or body fluids, including but not limited to urine, saliva, sweat, feces, vomit, breast milk, and semen. So you see a mother taking care of a child is unable to avoid any of these. A person who is sick with Ebola, objects like needles and syringes have been contaminated with the virus and infected animals. Ebola is not spread through the air by water or in general by food. However, in Africa, Ebola may be spread as a result of handling bush meat, and that's how it is believed that's how most epidemics begin. Wild animals hunted for food. They have to be butchered, and it's very easy to see blood coming from a butchered animal into a cut on a lesion in the hand. And contact with infected bats. Now, the bats are the animals which are thought to be the host, but the proof is not definitive. It's just the animal which is most often suspected of harboring the virus. There is no evidence that mosquitoes or other insects transmit Ebola. Only mammals, for example, humans, bats, monkeys, and apes, have shown the ability to become infected with and spread Ebola. In humans, and this has just come out this year, the virus can persist for many months in protected sites, such as the eye, spinal cord, breast, and transmitted via mother's milk, testes, vagina, and transmitted sexually. It was not known that Ebola was a sexually transmitted disease. It's got itself there too. And here is a surprise. It is not very contagious. It's only as contagious as hepatitis. It's less contagious as HIV/AIDS or SARS or mumps or measles. You look at measles. Measles has an infective factor of, oh God, I can't see that. I think it's 18, and Ebola is 2. So measles is 9 times as contagious as Ebola. The pathogenesis. Usually you see pictures like this and like this on the web, but they're usually exaggerated. The patients very few patients go that far. They die more quickly. They die, the appearance is usually very red eyes, some bleeding from the mouth, and just wasting. Now, the pathogenesis. You mind if I go through these quickly? It enters the patients through the mucous membranes. Mucous membranes are things like the lining of the mouth, the eye, and the nostrils. The incubation period may be related to the infection route. If it's via injection, it could be about 6 days versus about 10 days for contact. Contact means coming in and being contaminated with the patient's body fluids. Now, it migrates from the initial infection site to regional lymph nodes and subsequently to the liver, spleen, and adrenal glands. It appears to trigger the release of substances that produce fever. Now, the disease is called Ebola fever, but remember, a pathogen does not cause a fever. A pathogen gets the body to produce a fever. So there have been questions about, well, is the fever specific for Ebola? No, fever is never specific for any particular disease. because fever is the body's reaction to the disease. How Ebola, the destruction that Ebola causes is blood vessel destruction and impairment of clotting. First, soon after infection, the blood begins clotting until all clotting factors are used up. Then the blood begins to leak. It's as if an army were to, let's say, invade a country. The first thing it would do is destroy the police forces and the armed forces. Then it would move to the utilities, destroy electricity, the roads, water, telephones, everything, communication. It just destroys one after until there is just no communication, no source of food, no transport, and the organism collapses. And this is a very simple way that it does. A monocyte is the white cell in the blood that is responsible for removing pathogens. Any unknown organism in the blood is picked up by a monocyte. Ebola gets into the monocyte, it's picked up there, but what it does then is to use the monocyte as its host for multiplying. So then the cell, which is supposed to protect the body, becomes a factory for producing more viruses. Then the virus moves on to the endothelial cells. These are the cells that form the inner lining of blood vessels. It's like tiles in a blood vessel. The virus then attacks these and breaks them down, so the blood vessels become porous and blood pours and leaks out of blood vessels. Then the body goes into shock because the organs are not being supplied with blood. This is the fruit bat that's suspected. It's also known as a flying fox. It does look like a little dog. And I remember the photograph I had taken a long time ago at the entrance of a training center. I was standing at the doorway and heard a rustle up in the trees and looked up, and there were all of these bats. But nobody thought of Ebola then. Now, these are the man-made conveyors of disease. Airplanes, ships, trains, cars, trucks, artificial borders, and most important, neglect of basic primary health care. I'll show you some of the areas I worked with. This is a regional map of Guinea, and this is the half that I worked in. This is Guinea, and I worked in this half, all of this. And this is the extent of the current outbreak. It started here in this area and spread to Sierra Leone, Liberia. Guinea's capital is here, Conakry. And this was what terrified people most, because there are 2 million people in Conakry and they live elbow to elbow. And the world was terrified that if this got into Conakry, there would be no stopping it, because there'd be no place for people to go. And this was the assessment team and our transport. And this is what I found. This is a summary of what I found. Each color represents one of the factors that I was looking for, like skills, equipment, everything. And you notice there is only one bar that reaches near 70%. That means there was only one hospital in the entire region that I surveyed, which is over 50% efficiency, somewhere near zero. This group are the hospitals, then the health centers, and the health posts. There were 3 levels of health care. Do you see this here? Kubia, Kunjia. The score was 0. The highest score was at a hospital in a city called Bofa, 66%. And this was the most CHU Donka, that's the university teaching hospital, with a score of 38. And these were my trainees. Some of them are missing. And there were 19, they're not all in here. And I had to deal with a problem that I faced too frequently. When I ask for trainees, more than half of the people I get are administrators who come for the certificates and the per diem. So out of the 19, there were only 6 I allowed to pass. When I called the states and said, out of the 19 that I had, you know, only 6 people were able to pass the test. And to my surprise, somebody said, yes, we know. One of my best students was this lady. Unfortunately, she died a month after the end of the training. So we lost her. Now, this is not from Guinea. I put this in to illustrate a problem that's very common in Africa. Whenever we have a new disease, all resources are poured into that disease. So when HIV came along, it sucked everything away. This is taken in Uganda at Makerere. This is the HIV lab, very well equipped. You notice how the gentleman is dressed with a tie? This is the microbiology lab. There's nobody there, because everybody went over to the other one. There's just nothing. People just abandoned it. As a colleague in Mozambique said to me once, you know what our problem is? We want to fly 747s before we learn how to ride bicycles. Now, let me take you on a tour of the facilities. This is the first large hospital that I went to, Labé Regional Hospital, up in the north of Guinea. And I'll show you the different levels. This is a health center, Kubia. And this is a health post. The hospitals have staff, surgeons, clinicians, etc. The health centers may have one clinician and maybe nurses. The health post has a volunteer. It's not a medically trained person. He's given some equipment and he's told, good luck. And look at typical laboratory conditions in West Africa. Any West African country is going to have very similar conditions. All contaminated material is put in there. There is no sterilization. There is, when I asked to see equipment in one hospital, this is what I was given. This is what we have. The old slide, abandoned a microscope. All of this stuff contaminated with blood and simply left on the bench. These are very, very dangerous conditions to work in, because you have sharps and bits of glass and material contaminated with blood just lying around on bench tops. Everything is crowded. This was a pipette for preparing a stain for malaria. Just a little thing stuck in the wall. That was it. This was a hospital I had mentioned before, Bofa, which got the highest score. And compared to everywhere else, it's clean. And you notice he has all of his protocols on the wall. So he follows the rules. Now, this is just an example of the difference between trained people and what most patients have to deal with. This is a malaria research center at a place called Maferinia, not far from the capital. Just look at the shape of the preparations. You see, they're almost identical. Now the next slide shows what you get at the university teaching center. Unreadable. You just can't, it is totally useless. This poor gentleman, I remember very well, because he was told that we were coming, so get prepared. And he was waiting for us. He went home, he got a jacket and all of this, and we saw all of his equipment and everything lying on the table, and asked and began asking the questions that we had prepared. And we found that he knew nothing about the stuff that had been given. He was told officials are coming. So they just gave him some equipment and some tests, put them on a table, and told him that's all he needs to do. Just tell him, yes, he has everything. But he admitted to us he knew nothing about the stuff sitting on the table. They had simply told him officials were coming, and there you are. And this is one of the things I had to contend with. This is the chief of the laboratory doing one of the most dangerous things there is. He's not wearing gloves. And his hand is contaminated with blood from a patient. And he knows nothing about that patient. And he's traumatizing the patient. And this is one of the things that I had to start with. We had to start with the patient. And there were 3 rules. Every morning, the rules were repeated. 1, respect the patient. Because the practice was for the clinician, etc., to sit and shout, come in, and then the patient stood and was really never ever treated with the courtesy that was required. So I insisted that from that, that all the healthcare workers would stand, the patients would sit, and would be treated with courtesy. And this way you actually get much more information from the patient, because the patient is not terrified. Here are some of the things that I had to deal with. This lady has, these are the oculars on the microscope. You notice they're different. So different magnification, so she can't see. And I also noticed she was just using one eye. And I found that she was deaf and blind in one eye. And this is very, very common. The crowded hospital area, there are no more beds, so people just sit outside. And then 2 patients to bed. These children had come in a coma. There was no room, so they had to share a bed. In Sierra Leone, these were patients who could not be admitted, who could not be attended to. So some of them simply died where they lay. This is a patient being carried off. You notice the sprayer on the back? Because he's spraying bleach over everything and everybody as they were carrying the patient away. This is the National Institute of Public Health in Conakry. That's it. That's the institution that's responsible for public health of the country. There's no electricity, no water. And here are some of the factors that lead to new epidemics: mining, dams, deforestation, global warming, and disease. In Brazil, we've had outbreaks because of all of these things, of Chagas disease and cutaneous leishmaniasis. In West Africa, Ebola, Lassa fever, Marburg, malaria, yellow fever. Southeast Asia, SARS. South America, malaria. Egypt and Sudan, schistosomiasis. Because of the human activities, there are consequences. Deforestation. You notice the entire hillside is devoid of trees. And you see entire hills and mountains simply with grass, because all the trees have been cut back for farming. And when you do this, when you go into the forest, then you come into contact with animals' new diseases that Ebola is a perfect example of something that was not known before and for which humans have no protection. Deforestation for charcoal. And environmental disruption. There is a lot of this in Africa: armed conflict and disease. Guinea, Sierra Leone, Liberia. Because of civil wars, they now have to contend with uncontrolled Ebola and malaria. Iraq, visceral leishmaniasis. We're seeing a lot of this now from the soldiers who fought in Iraq. Leishmaniasis is a disease that's caused by I don't want to get technical. It's a protozoan it's a very small parasite that eats away flesh. There are cutaneous forms where the patients can lose the lips, parts of the face, and the nose, and there's a visceral form which goes for the liver and spleen. So we're seeing a lot of that from returnees from Iraq. The Congo, Ebola, malaria, sleeping sickness. In Haiti, cholera. That in conflict zones you have problems with populations forced out because of civil disturbance. Do you see the small holes on the wall? These are bullet holes. And the villagers have left because of invasion of their territory by rebel soldiers from across borders, etc. The usual. But all of these small holes are bullet holes. We went to the small village, and that was the only person there. And an abandoned hospital in a conflict zone. After the war, people simply came in and took the mattresses and everything. That was all that was left. Also, because of armed conflict, people are unable to farm because a lot of the land is mined. There are land mines buried in their fields, so they are unable to attend to their crops. This is a picture taken in Liberia before the outbreak. This was typical of downtown on a Saturday. After the outbreak, this is what it looked like. People stayed home. Now, some of the behavioral factors associated with the epidemic. There is no experience with the disease, so people didn't know what to do. Traditional burial customs with exposure to the virus. In these areas, when a person died, the entire village, the family, friends, everybody has to come to clean the body. They have to wash it, they have to kiss it, and there's a lot of contact with it. And it was very difficult to tell people to stop traditions that were hundreds of years old. The disease has non-specific symptoms. It was difficult for clinicians to decide what the patient was suffering from, because Ebola initially looks very much like typhoid or malaria. Then there was denial by officials. That always happens. The president goes down to some place where there's an outbreak and says, these are just Westerners, these are newspapers, don't believe it, there's nothing going on, until it is too late. Yeah. Then there's a mistrust of government, because the governments do not always tell people what is going on, so nobody believes them. Then the use of traditional treatments. Before seeking conventional medicine, people would go to the traditional healer, what we used to call a witch doctor. If that doesn't work, then they go to the clinician. By then it could be too late. And then the traditional healer becomes a contact and brings it to his family. There's a fear of healthcare workers coming in hazmat suits. These are the protective suits. And it was terrifying for villagers to see these people looking like spacemen coming to villages, taking the sick away, because then the patients never came back. So there were rumors that the people in the hazmat suits were taking people to kill them. And we had problems. CDC lost 13 vehicles. They were just burned. Several of our people were attacked. And there was in one town called Macenta, where the army was sent to rescue some healthcare workers. Many of them had been murdered by the time the army got there. And there was a fear that patients who went to health facilities would never come back, that they would be infected with Ebola there. And there was this custom that anyone who died had to be returned to the village of his birth. And the problem we had sometimes was that even professionals who knew better would insist on being sent back to their village of their birth if they died. And very frequently at roadblocks, you would have taxis carrying dead people, wearing shades, with seat belts, and propped up between two living people. Fortunately, they were able to, everybody, at the roadblocks, everybody had temperature taken with the little thermal flashes, the little pistols for the reading temperatures. And occasionally you'd find a passenger in a taxi with a reading of 0. Which meant that all contacts, we had to start the contact tracing. The taxi had to be impounded, the driver and everybody then, all relatives of the people. And then there's a fear of ostracism. People who had symptoms did not want to report it because they did not want the problems associated with this. Now, the international response. The first to come in was Senegal. This is the Senegalese diagnostic lab. Then the US came in. The US was last, but I couldn't put the slide last. And they airlifted an entire lab. They flew it from Kansas to Senegal. It took 2 days. And the crew came out wearing these suits. Because and this is the lab after it was erected. Canada sent a small transportable lab, which is housed in something like a tent. The Russians had the largest. They had a compound. But after talking with the Russians, I found they were there for more than Ebola. They had sent a team in to see what else existed in the country that they could take with them. This is the patient I had mentioned that the virus can persist in breast milk. This is a patient that we had kept for 2 months because she had recovered from the disease, but nobody knew what to do since she was shedding the virus in her breast milk. It was a very strange case. She and her husband had the disease and had recovered, but her baby died 2 months after birth from Ebola. And it was a bit of a mystery. Why should the baby have Ebola and not the parents? And where did the baby get the virus from? And eventually the Russians tested her breast milk and found it. And 2 months later, she was still shedding viruses in her breast milk. After I put this photograph in, I looked at it more closely and noticed that she was looking back at me. You can't see it there. You'd have to. France sent some very sophisticated equipment, probably the most sophisticated. This is the diagnostic lab. And with their compound, they had the disposable patient room. After patients had used this room and recovered or died, then what happened was that the entire room was taken down and burned. It was not decontaminated or cleaned. And these are the patient tents. This is the European Union lab. This is several European countries. And these are the staff preparing to enter the patient area. And there were 2 patients awaiting treatment. The patients have to do everything for themselves. They were simply given food and water. And this is how they're given food and water, down a ramp. The patients are in here. There is a wooden ramp here. These are food, the bags of food, and he's rolling a bottle of water down, so there's no contact with the patient. This is a lady who's just received a bottle of water. This is a treatment, another French treatment and testing site. This is, my driver and transport. Now, I put this picture in there because in these conditions, your driver is your guardian, your best friend, your advisor, everything. Your entire life depends on him because he has to get you where you need to go. He also, more importantly, has to get you out of there if things get bad. And he has to know how to do it, and he has to be quick. So your driver becomes your best friend because you do nothing without him. This is Dr. Lamine, whom I worked with. He collected the first specimen in which the virus was identified. He got the first blood specimen, which he sent to France, and 2 days later, he got the worst possible news. This was Ebola. This was a newly arrived lab in the capital, Conakry. And France was providing these motorcycle ambulances. Now, these are the people that I have the highest regard for. These are the people who go out to collect the specimens, and the dead bodies. And they're all volunteers. They're all university students mostly. And they're unpaid. And they do the most dangerous jobs in Guinea. And you notice most of them are smiling. And there is their equipment, the sprayers with bleach. And this is the truck, one of the trucks that they use for collecting the dead bodies. They wrap them in the plastic bags and carry them at the back of the pickup. And the pickup gets there, it's unloaded, then everything has to be sprayed down. And here is a volunteer bringing a specimen to the lab, drops it in there because it has to be decontaminated. It's decontaminated with a bleach spray. This is the rapid test, very, very simple. And it's used for 2 specimens, for saliva and for blood. You see the spot here? This is the one that takes the blood. The blood is put into this. There's a small well. With the one for saliva, this portion is used as a swab. And this is the training in the use of the swab for saliva. These were my trainees. 3 of them were selected for using the test first in the country. And each one had to play act as a corpse. And these are the disinfection stations that we had all over Guinea. Every few miles you had to stop and decontaminate yourself. Had to wash your hands in bleach. And before entering most places, there were these signs: please wash hands before entering. Before I got into my hotel, I had to do this. I had to have my temperature taken with this, and I had to wash my hands with bleach. Now, it's treatment for the disease, providing intravenous fluid, maintaining oxygen status and blood pressure, treating other infections if they occur, and now the experimental vaccines and treatments for Ebola. And we don't yet know their results. It's still early. And there's some new drugs being tested. Practice is very simple. You stay away from it. Very careful hygiene. Wash your hands with soap and water. That was the most important thing. Do not handle items that may have come into contact with an infected person. And most of all, avoid funeral or burial rituals that require handling the body of someone who had died from Ebola. This was how most cases were required, from handling dead bodies. Avoid contact with animals. This was drilled into us. Do not go into any hospital. If you're ill, we will fly you back. Do not go into a hospital in West Africa, especially one where Ebola patients are treated. And after you return, monitor your health for 21 days. These were the signs you had everywhere. And the human cost. The threat to humanity is a political weapon. It could be used as a biological weapon. It causes a reduction in investments. People do not want to go in the country with Ebola. There are travel restrictions. These are obvious. Diversion of funds from services and development. All money had to be directed to preventing the spread of the disease, and political and social upheaval. This was my personal protection. That is actually all I had. This was the little gel. And I had to carry 4 telephones because Atlanta and the embassy and the Ebola, everybody at some time wanted to know where you were. And you had to have the phones on for GPS so they could locate you quickly. And these made me uncomfortable because every now and then you'd see these birds looking at you as if waiting for you to die. So and this is why we go back. After you've seen these children looking at you, you forget that you're in a dangerous situation. Now I want to show you what life is like in Guinea. This is my hotel. This is what it looked outside my hotel. Water transport on the road. This defied all laws of physics. This is very, very common. And there were a few things that frightened me more than that, because you'd be you had to drive behind these, and there was always the fear that somebody would fall off, and then it would be under your car. You see how he's trapped himself in there. And the usual traffic jams. And everybody moves in any direction. As long as there's a space, they will take it. And occasionally you had these situations. There was just one small bridge, and you took your turn. And you see, well, sanitary conditions for food are not very good. This is the market. This is the fruit section. This is the butcher shop. Do you see the butcher in the hammock behind the meat? There is no refrigeration, so the meat has to be consumed as quickly as possible. The bread by the wheelbarrow. And you can buy whatever length you want. There is a knife there, and they'll cut off the amount that you want. And this is Ria sauce. That's a national dish. It's rice, and there is a sauce of mashed potatoes or cassava leaves with bits of any meat that they have. So usually had in the mixture with bits of fish and meat or chicken or anything that was available. And this was my favorite. And the giant prawns, some enormous prawns. And guess what restaurant they came from? I bet you know. The Obama Seafood Restaurant. And after that, you could go to, and teboudian, which I liked. It was a casserole of fish and rice and vegetables. The roadside fruits. Guinea has lots of fruits. There are fruits everywhere. You notice there are mangoes for sale on the tables. If you look above, you will see the trees, the mango trees. So they simply pick the mangoes and put them down on the table. Best mangoes ever. These are typical living conditions. It's not easy living in Guinea. And here is the bar the Obama bar. And this gentleman had selected this site for begging. Nobody else would do it. He would lie between, in the middle lane, on the line between the two lanes of cars. This is where he begged from. Now, there were several of these people, and I was surprised when I saw the degree of infirmities there, and I thought it didn't look like polio, because it wasn't just the legs, and there was something different about polio victims. And I asked, how these people acquired these infirmities? And I was told, sometimes, if you don't have the money, you go to the traditional healer. What the traditional healer gives you is not tested. Nobody knows anything about it. He will inject you with anything that he has. And the result may be the loss of muscle and nerves. So you get crippled. It was dangerous walking at night. You didn't do it without a flashlight, because there were all of these open holes. And occasionally, you had problems driving at night too, because if you were not familiar with the roads, then you would disappear down a hole. This was a small town I lived in for 2 weeks, Maferinia. That's the main street. And this was my hotel. And this was my roommate. And my neighbors. And the restaurant. Which was why I lost a lot. I lost about 10 pounds because of diarrhea from eating at these places. There is no refrigeration. And so your choice is diarrhea or starvation. So you take the diarrhea. This is Beaufort, the one I told you that got very high marks. And maybe that's why they were so efficient. We'd get there and there'd be a welcome dance, which is very nice. Torture by pillowcase. I insisted that I just get plain white pillowcases, but management thought I deserved better. So every day I would get one of these colorful things, which I couldn't sleep on. That's the national bear of Guinea. It looks. After my 2-month assignment, I was given a day in Paris. So I stopped at the airport. My temperature was taken. I was given a leaflet. And I was told, if you don't feel well, call this number. All right, yes. So and that was it. And I was able to go to Paris and tour. Went to Notre Dame. Went to the Louvre. had a nice time. I got to the United States, quarantined. And then 21 days at home, having taken my temperature. And then home, and the orchids were blooming. And these are the people who made my presentation possible. And you, of course.
Okay, this lecture has come to an end. And on behalf of the head and staff of UWI Open Campus, I wish to thank Her Excellency, Dame Paulette Louisi, for gracing us with her presence, Dr. Charmaine Gardner for her insight in spearheading the process, Cuban Ambassador, the Chief Medical Officer, staff of the Ministry of Health, nurses, members of the St. Lucia Dental and Medical Association, staff of the UWI Open Campus, UWI alumni and friends, other members of the public. And we must say a big thank you and give a resounding applause to Dr. Earl Long, our special guest. Our special guest and esteemed honorary graduates of the UWI Open Campus. Indeed, it was a very thought-provoking and inspiring lecture, and I'm sure that persons were able to gain from this, as well as the situation in West Africa. No doubt the Ebola virus is very deadly, and we are happy to have received such pertinent information from our learned Dr. Long. Let us hope this will be a stepping stone to a greater awareness among persons. Dr. Long, a true son of St. Lucian soil, you have made us proud,